Look closely at the screen. A heavily redacted Central Intelligence Agency document from 1984 slowly reveals a set of stark geographic coordinates. Now look at this modern satellite imagery of a classified Soviet nuclear facility. It perfectly matches a crude sketch made by a man locked in a lead-lined room 3,000 miles away. This is not a rejected science fiction script. This is a declassified operational report from the United States government. You probably still believe your thoughts are safely locked away inside your skull, a private sanctuary isolated from the rest of the world. I'm here to tell you that you are living in a comforting 19th century illusion. This naive materialism leaves you entirely blind to the invisible biological and quantum forces that intelligence agencies have actively monitored for decades. Your mind is not a fortress. It is wide open, completely exposed to the cold, echoing void of the universe. We are about to tear up your standard high school physics textbook page by page. By looking strictly through the lens of cold mathematics, probability theory, and declassified military files, you will learn exactly how a handful of rogue scientists proved the human mind can shatter the speed of light. The official narrative is a myth designed to protect your psychological stability. The government tried desperately to bury this evidence, not to hide a weapon, but to save their own sanity. It is 1972, deep inside the Stanford Research Institute. A chillingly cold concrete vault houses a superconducting magnetometer, a device so hypersensitive it measures minute fluctuations in the magnetic field of the Earth itself. Suddenly, the recording needle jumps violently. To the statistical analyst reviewing the data, the terror is immediate. The needle is moving simply because a man standing outside the vault was instructed to think about it. You must understand the sheer impossibility of what the CIA was actually funding. This magnetometer was encased in layers of shielding designed to block out all electromagnetic interference. It was built to detect the absolute faintest cosmic whispers, completely isolated from human touch. Yet, researchers deliberately placed a human subject near this impenetrable technological fortress. They were not testing his physical strength, but attempting to measure the physical weight of human consciousness. The instructions given to the subject were absurdly simple, almost insulting to a classical physicist. He was asked to simply perturb the internal workings of the shielded device using nothing but his focused attention. He did not speak. He did not move a single muscle. But the machine registered a massive shockwave. For several agonizing seconds, the output frequency of the heavily guarded magnetometer suddenly doubled. This was not just a bump on a graph. It was a catastrophic decay rate anomaly. According to every established law of thermodynamics and classical mechanics, what happened in that concrete vault is absolutely impossible without direct physical interaction. Energy cannot magically leap through heavily shielded walls. The statistical analyst staring at the printout realizes that the fundamental architecture of reality is breaking down right in front of his eyes. Naturally, the immediate assumption was a system glitch. The scientific method demands skepticism, so the team relentlessly checked the equipment for malfunctions, loose wires, or stray radio frequencies. But the math refused to offer them the comforting excuse of an error. The probability of this specific frequency doubling occurring as a random equipment malfunction was calculated at precisely 1 in 10,000. It was not a glitch. It was a mathematically verified, localized anomaly. That 1 in 10,000 probability forced these brilliant, skeptical scientists to acknowledge a truly horrifying variable. The rigidly defined boundary between the observer and the physical world does not exist. The human mind is not a passive camera recording events. It is an active gear grinding against the machinery of the universe. If a thought can reach through solid concrete to manipulate a subatomic sensor, then our entire materialistic worldview is nothing but a fairy tale. I want you to truly grasp the intellectual horror of this revelation. We spent the last 300 years building a civilization on the assumption that the mind is safely contained within the biological meat of the brain. Sir Isaac Newton taught us that the universe is a predictable, mechanical clock. But this single jump of a needle at Stanford throws that entire clock into the garbage. We created a science of dead matter, only to discover that the matter is actively listening to us. This is where the true terror of Project Stargate begins to take root. It was never about cheap parlor tricks. It was about the unforgiving realization that human consciousness operates completely outside the physical constraints of space and time. If a mere thought can alter a magnetic field inside a sealed vault, it means our minds are constantly bleeding out into the environment. You are not an isolated individual. You are a leaking, vulnerable node in an incomprehensible cosmic network. When the Central Intelligence Agency and the Department of Defense saw these numbers, they did not laugh. They did not dismiss it as a statistical fluke. They panicked. If reality is this pliable, if the mind can bypass lead and concrete, then every military doctrine ever written is instantly rendered obsolete. The most powerful government on Earth realized that all their nuclear silos and deep-water submarines were completely defenseless against an invisible, non-local threat. The anomaly at Stanford was just the crack in the dam. Once the intelligence community realized the human mind possessed a measurable physical impact on the universe, they poured millions of dollars into tearing that crack wide open. They weaponized the anomaly. They needed to know just how far this invisible tether could reach. Could a mind that alters a machine from 10 feet away do the same thing from 1,000 miles away? The abyss had opened, and the government decided to dive in. The data was so irrefutable that it birthed an entirely new, highly classified discipline. The architects of Project Stargate realized they were no longer dealing with psychology. They were hacking the underlying source code of physical reality itself. They stripped away the mysticism and applied brutal, military precision to the human soul. They needed to test the ultimate limits of this anomaly, pushing human perception until the very concept of distance shattered completely. But the sheer impossibility of the magnetometer anomaly leaves us with a terrifying, lingering question. If human consciousness is not bound by the physical skull, and if it can mathematically manipulate a shielded subatomic environment, then what exactly is stopping it from traversing the globe instantaneously? The answer lies in a classified coordinate match that would soon bring the entire geopolitical structure of the Cold War to its knees. The local anomaly at the Stanford Research Institute was a crack in the foundation of classical physics, but what poured through that crack was a geopolitical nightmare. We are moving from the sterile confines of a California laboratory directly into the frozen, paranoid heart of the Soviet Union. The target is Semipalatinsk, a name whispered with dread in the intelligence community. To the classical physicist, the distance of 6,000 miles is an insurmountable void. The intelligence supervisor sits in a windowless room, the air thick with stale smoke and a hum of fluorescent lights. On the desk before him lies a chaotic spread of black and white satellite imagery. His eyes trace the contours of a crude hand-drawn sketch resting precisely over a top-secret photograph. The structural angles match with a terrifying, mathematically impossible precision. He is staring at a tear in the fabric of reality itself. The sketch depicts a massive, specialized gantry crane, a piece of heavy machinery vital to the Soviet nuclear weapons program. But the horror does not stem from the weapon itself. The true terror lies in the origin of the drawing. The artist was not a spy on the ground with a hidden camera, nor a pilot flying a high-altitude spy plane high above the clouds. The artist was a man sitting perfectly still in an armchair, half a world away. You were taught that gathering intelligence requires a physical presence, a photon hitting a lens, a sound wave vibrating a microphone. You were programmed to believe in the absolute limit of the speed of light. Yet, intelligence officers provided this subject with nothing more than raw geographic coordinates. A set of numbers representing a suspected Soviet weapons facility at Semipalatinsk, located over 6,000 miles away from his physical body. Consider the sheer absurdity of this premise from a Newtonian perspective. The human brain, a 3-pound lump of wet biological tissue, is somehow supposed to reach across oceans, continents, and heavily militarized borders simply by pondering a string of numbers. According to every textbook sitting in every high school on Earth, this is not just impossible, it is laughable. But the intelligence supervisor looking at the desk is not laughing. The subject accurately described and sketched the exact structural ratios of the massive gantry crane. He captured the specific, non-standard dimensions of the rails and the heavy lifting mechanisms. He did this with chilling clarity, before the United States even possessed clear satellite confirmation of the crane's existence. The human mind entirely outpaced a multi-billion-dollar orbital surveillance network. This is the moment your comforting, materialistic worldview collapses. If a human being can perceive a heavily guarded, top-secret structure on the opposite side of the planet with nothing but closed eyes, then space itself is a lie. The physical distance between you and the furthest star, the distance between the American intelligence apparatus and the Soviet nuclear arsenal, is functionally zero. The intelligence community could not ignore a weapon this potent. The program formalized this terrifying process, giving it the clinical, bureaucratic title of remote viewing. This was not a mystical seance. It was a strict, double-blind protocol designed to brutally eliminate any possibility of guesswork, psychological priming, or statistical coincidence. They chained the infinite potential of the human mind to a government clipboard. The protocol proved that high-resolution data could be retrieved across the globe instantaneously. More profoundly, it proved this information transfer completely bypassed the electromagnetic spectrum. It was not a radio wave propagating through the atmosphere subject to signal decay. It was something far deeper, a fundamental exploit in the architecture of the universe. The intelligence supervisor realizes that his enemies are no longer separated by oceans. Looking at the hand-drawn lines overlapping the grainy satellite photo, the supervisor experiences a profound existential vertigo. The geopolitical chessboard he has dedicated his life to mastering has suddenly lost its board. If consciousness exists outside the biological brain, if it can instantly access any coordinate in space-time, then the very concept of a physical secret is evolutionarily obsolete. Every vault on the planet is inherently open. You probably still cling to the illusion of privacy. You think the thoughts bouncing around your skull belong to you alone, insulated by bone and physical distance. The Semipalatinsk match mathematically dismantles that psychological comfort. You are living in a 19th century paradigm, stubbornly refusing to accept that consciousness is not a localized phenomenon, but a pervasive, non-local force that mocks the physical constraints we build our lives around. The implications of this successful remote strike resonated through the highly classified corridors of Langley like a silent detonation. If an American citizen sitting in a dark room could sketch a Soviet nuclear crane before a satellite could even photograph it, what were the Soviets currently doing to us? The driving paranoia was no longer about physical spies dead-dropping microfilm. It was about an invisible, untraceable invasion of the mind. The anomaly had officially graduated from a laboratory curiosity to a matter of acute national security. The United States intelligence apparatus had successfully found their sixth sense, but they had also uncovered a cosmic horror that defied all traditional military logic. They were staring directly into an abyss of infinite information, and their immediate, terrifying realization was that the abyss was already staring back, heavily funded by the enemy. Having seen the undeniable field results from the Semipalatinsk strike, the intelligence apparatus must now confront a paralyzing reality. The enemy is no longer just at the gates. They are already inside the minds of the highest commanders. The geopolitical chessboard has dissolved into a terrifying, non-local void. We are accustomed to measuring national security in megatons and steel armor, but you are about to see how the most powerful military on Earth surrendered to the invisible. Step inside the Director of Central Intelligence's office. A thick folder stamped Top Secret No Foreign is slammed onto a heavy mahogany desk. The camera pushes in on the budget line items, black ink on crisp white paper. This is the physical weight of government bureaucracy, validating the scientifically impossible. You were taught in university that parapsychology is a fringe pseudoscience, a joke for the gullible. Yet here is the stark, undeniable proof that the Pentagon completely disagreed. The bureaucrats staring at those line items are not funding a laboratory curiosity. They are acting out of pure, existential panic. They are looking at the Soviet parapsychology gap, an invisible arms race far more terrifying than the stockpiling of nuclear warheads. You think the Cold War was won with spy planes and proxy battles, but the real front line was the human consciousness. The horrific realization is that the ultimate weapon of mass infiltration is resting quietly inside your own skull. Let us look at the concrete numbers, the undeniable accounting of pure fear. By the late 1970s, the Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency had funneled nearly $20 million into Project Stargate. $20 million allocated to an unprecedented program studying the weaponization of human consciousness. This is not fiction. This is an audited, taxpayer-funded ledger. Why does a hyper-rational, mathematically driven military apparatus pour $20 million into what your high school physics textbook calls magic? Because statistics do not care about your comfort zone. The officials in that smoke-filled room understood something that most academic institutions still stubbornly deny. The universe is not a neat mechanical clock. It is a terrifyingly interconnected web of raw information, and the human mind is merely an antenna picking up the signal. Declassified memos from the archives revealed the true, chilling motivation behind the massive expenditure. American intelligence discovered that the Soviet Union was massively outspending them on psychotronic research. They were systematically mapping the architecture of the mind, while the West was still building better bullets. This created a profound parapsychology gap, a deficit in understanding the fabric of reality itself. The Soviet research institutes were not looking for parlor tricks. They were attempting to mathematically quantify the human soul and turn it into a tactical asset. If a trained operative in Moscow could project their consciousness into a classified briefing in Washington, the entire concept of a secure facility evaporates. The paradigm shifts from defending physical borders to the impossible task of defending the non-local vacuum. You cannot build a wall to keep out an invisible frequency. This brings us to the underlying terror that haunted the highest levels of the Pentagon. The horrifying realization was that if remote viewing is an inherent human capability, then absolute security is a biological impossibility. The mathematical implications are devastating. No subterranean vault, no deep-water nuclear submarine, and no heavily guarded missile silo on Earth could ever truly be secure from a consciousness that ignores the limitations of space and time. Reality is utterly porous. Your entire concept of civilization is built on the illusion of the locked door. You lock your house, you encrypt your data, and governments bury their secrets beneath mountains of solid granite. But these declassified documents laugh at your primitive materialism. When the intelligence agencies realized that the mind can instantly bridge any distance, they realized that every single secret ever kept is floating naked in the cosmic void, waiting for a biological receiver to simply tune in. The Director of Central Intelligence, a man whose entire career is predicated on hiding information, is suddenly forced to realize that the laws of physics are actively conspiring against him. The panic in that office is not just geopolitical. It is a profound philosophical collapse. The universe is entirely indifferent to the classified stamps on those folders. The concept of an isolated observer is a comforting lie evolution told you to prevent madness from the sheer volume of cosmic data. We arrogantly assume our intelligence agencies are the masters of the shadows, manipulating the globe from their soundproof rooms. But in the face of a non-local universe, they were reduced to terrified children trying to hold back an ocean with a sieve. They threw millions of dollars at the anomaly, desperately trying to map its borders, to contain it within a scientific framework. But how do you contain a phenomenon that mathematically proves your physical universe is merely a projection? So the next time you look up at the night sky and feel a sense of profound, isolating distance, consider the thick folders sitting on that mahogany desk. The stars are not billions of light-years away from your mind. They are immediately accessible. You are entangled in a cosmic web of information so vast and instantaneous, but it terrified the most ruthless military strategists of the 20th century. The abyss is intimately connected to your neural pathways, every single second of your life. The intelligence community had the empirical evidence, the terrifying geopolitical motivation, and the millions of dollars in funding. But to truly harness this anomaly, they needed to explain it. They needed a new vocabulary of madness. They had to abandon the classical, mechanical physics of Isaac Newton and embrace the mathematical nightmares lurking within the subatomic realm. The answer to how the mind travels was waiting in the darkest corners of quantum mechanics. To understand how the Pentagon weaponized the human mind, we must completely strip away the comforting mysticism of the New Age movement. We have to look directly at the brutal, unyielding mathematics of quantum physics. Through the eyes of the statistical analyst, the chalkboard in this dimly lit university office is not a surface for abstract theories, but a tombstone for our traditional understanding of reality. The chalk dust settles over complex equations, specifically Bell's theorem, juxtaposed violently against a wall plastered with declassified psychic test scores. The professor aggressively erases classical physics models, wiping away centuries of Newtonian comfort with a few harsh swipes of an eraser. You have been taught that the universe is a predictable machine, but the analyst stares at the board and realizes that the machine is a lie. The true horror of the Stargate archives is not that people can see through walls. The terror lies in the mechanism itself, quantum non-locality acting as the fundamental carrier wave for human thought. Every textbook you ever read operates on the strict principle of locality, the dogma that an object can only be directly influenced by its immediate, localized physical surroundings. If you throw a rock, it must travel through the air to break a window. Information, according to this classical model, must travel through space and time. But the analyst looks at the Stargate data, where the geographic coordinate matches occurred instantaneously across thousands of miles. The results fundamentally violate the speed of light, mocking the very foundation of mainstream physics. For the statistician mapping these data points, the correlation is an intellectual nightmare. The anomaly demands a new framework, one where physical space itself is completely irrelevant. The answer is found in the phenomenon of quantum entanglement. This is the mathematical proof that two particles can instantly share information regardless of the physical distance separating them. Albert Einstein famously recoiled from this concept, derisively labeling it spooky action at a distance. He understood the terrifying philosophical implication. If particles can communicate instantaneously across the universe, then our perception of empty space is nothing but a biological illusion. The universe is not a vast empty room. It is a dense, hyper-connected web of immediate interactions. For decades, arrogant materialists claimed this quantum weirdness was strictly confined to subatomic particles inside frozen laboratories. They told you that the warm, wet environment of the human brain was far too chaotic to sustain any delicate quantum state. But the analyst tracing the remote viewing scores knows the military proved otherwise, and modern science is finally catching up to the classified data. In 2024, researchers publishing in the journal Nature Physics proposed a theoretical framework that shatters the biological paradigm. They suggest that the neural microtubule networks inside your brain might actually function as macroscopic quantum receivers. Your skull is not a sealed vault isolating your consciousness. It is a highly tuned organic antenna. You are fundamentally tethered to an underlying universal information field, processing data from the furthest reaches of the cosmos in real time. If this realization shatters your understanding of reality and blows your mind as much as it terrified the Pentagon, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments if you think humanity is ready for this terrifying truth. The implications of these microtubule networks are staggering. It means that every thought, every memory, and every intention you possess is not generated solely within the gray matter of your brain. Instead, your consciousness is actively participating in a non-local exchange of data, continuously downloading and uploading information to the quantum fabric of the universe itself. This is exactly why the intelligence apparatus poured millions into human consciousness. They were not funding magic. They were weaponizing an innate biological interface with the quantum field. The analyst understands that a remote viewer sketching a Soviet base is simply a human being momentarily aligning their neural antenna to a specific resonant frequency within that non-local web. Your brain is a node in an incomprehensible cosmic architecture. You are programmed to experience time as a linear river and space as a vast emptiness, solely to prevent your sensory processors from overloading. But the Stargate data proves that under the right protocols, that evolutionary firewall can be bypassed, exposing the fragile human psyche to the raw, unfiltered data of the entire universe. Standing before the chalkboard, the analyst feels the suffocating weight of this paradigm shift. The classical physics erased from the board represents the death of human isolation. If the mind operates on quantum non-locality, then there are no secrets. There is no private thought. Everything you have ever hidden is technically accessible to an observer who knows how to tune the receiver. The intelligence supervisors staring at these mathematical proofs realized that their trillion-dollar defense networks were obsolete before they were even built. A concrete bunker cannot shield against a consciousness that already exists simultaneously inside and outside the bunker. The speed of light is a speed limit for matter, but it is entirely irrelevant to the entangled architecture of human thought. The math is flawless, and the test scores on the wall confirm it. But theories on a chalkboard were not enough for the military-industrial complex. If human thought truly operated outside the electromagnetic spectrum, they needed to test its absolute physical limits. They needed to lock a human being in the darkest, most impenetrable environment on Earth to see if the cosmic signal could finally be jammed. The military-industrial complex could not accept the mathematics of quantum entanglement without a fight. If human thought truly operated outside the electromagnetic spectrum, they needed to test its absolute physical limits. To the intelligence supervisor, the solution was brutal but logical. Lock a human being in the darkest, most impenetrable environment on Earth and see if this cosmic signal could finally be jammed. Pentagon generals clung to this comforting belief that all information must travel through a physical medium. A radio wave, a light beam, a sound vibration. The Pentagon generals clung to this comforting lie. They convinced themselves that remote viewing was just an undiscovered biological radio, perhaps an extremely low-frequency electromagnetic wave broadcast by the organic tissues of the human brain. Look through the eyes of the intelligence supervisor overseeing this desperate experiment. You are not in a comfortable laboratory anymore. You are inside a nuclear submarine, submerged hundreds of feet below the crushing weight of the ocean surface. Absolute sensory deprivation. The hull is surrounded by millions of tons of conductive salt water, the ultimate physical barrier against any known form of communication. Alternatively, watch as they seal a subject inside a heavy copper Faraday cage on dry land. A windowless vault constructed with overlapping layers of dense conductive mesh, specifically designed to absorb and neutralize electromagnetic radiation. No radio waves, no radar, no microwave signals can penetrate this physical tomb. The absolute claustrophobia of the space is physically suffocating to the human observer. Inside this copper cage, the subject sits in total isolation. To the supervisor watching the monitors, this is the ultimate quarantine. If the human mind is simply a biological radio transmitter, the thick copper walls and the crushing depths of the ocean will silence it completely. The electromagnetic hypothesis is about to face its ultimate, unyielding trial by fire. The coordinates of a hidden target are handed to the isolated subject. The supervisor waits for the inevitable failure. You would naturally expect the subject to draw a blank, to report nothing but the terrifying silence of the deep ocean or the dead air of the copper vault. Classical materialism dictates that the connection has been successfully severed. The ultimate physical firewall has been raised. But the universe does not care about our primitive physical firewalls. To test if remote viewing relied on extremely low-frequency waves, These researchers utilized environments utterly impenetrable to standard radiation. Yet, as the intelligence supervisor watches the closed-circuit feed, the subject begins to speak. They calmly, methodically, and accurately describe the classified hidden target. The heavy shielding had absolutely zero effect on the accuracy of the remote viewing sessions. The physical radio wave theory was decisively disproved right there in the darkness. The thick copper walls did not diminish the signal by a single percentage point. The crushing ocean depth did not distort or delay the image of the target in the slightest. You must understand the sheer intellectual horror of this moment. The intelligence supervisor realizes that his billion-dollar submarines and impenetrable vaults are entirely useless against the human mind. The military tried to build a cage for consciousness, only to discover that the bird was never actually inside the cage to begin with. Your brain is not broadcasting a radio wave across the physical globe. This experiment delivered a chilling philosophical blow to the very foundation of Western materialism. It proved unequivocally that the transfer of information was strictly non-local. This means that consciousness is not traveling from point A to point B. It is not moving through the air, and it is not magically penetrating the copper walls. It does not have to, because the very concept of distance is a myth. At a fundamental mathematical level, distance and space are merely illusions generated by our limited biological perception. You experience space because your physical body needs to navigate a physical world to survive. But the mind, the pure observer locked inside that Faraday cage, is not bound by the friction of physical reality. It is already everywhere simultaneously, tethered to the cosmic architecture. The intelligence supervisor is left staring at a universe that suddenly makes no logical sense. If space is a fabricated illusion, then you are not simply sitting in your room. You are merely focusing your local awareness on a specific set of coordinates within an infinite, entangled cosmic web. The void of space is not a terrifying emptiness. It is a dense ocean of immediate, universally accessible information. We build concrete bunkers and bury our secrets deep underground, comforting ourselves with the illusion of isolation. But the unyielding data from these submarine tests shattered that arrogance. The mind does not travel across the globe to view a hidden Soviet target. It simply accesses the precise data point where the target and the observer already entirely coexist within the vast quantum field. You thought you were an isolated individual, a private consciousness safely locked inside a protective skull. But the Stargate files prove that your mind is deeply, terrifyingly porous. The physical universe you perceive is just a biological user interface, a simplified dashboard hiding the raw, terrifying reality of absolute, non-local connection. There is absolutely nowhere left to hide. Anecdotes from submarines and Faraday cages are terrifying, but the intelligence apparatus operates on cold, hard data. They needed undeniable proof that these successful viewings were not just statistical anomalies or incredibly lucky guesses. To truly validate this existential nightmare, the Central Intelligence Agency would have to turn to the ultimate, unforgiving arbiter of reality: mathematics. Beyond the anecdotal successes in the field, the intelligence apparatus needed empirical, undeniable proof. The relentless, mechanical clacking of a massive IBM mainframe echoes through a windowless basement. A statistician stands over miles of continuous probability data on tractor feed paper, a red pen hovering above the printout. You always thought mathematics was a comforting, predictable system. You were profoundly wrong. Here, in the sterile output of the machine, math is the monster in the dark. To the statistical analyst tracing these numbers, the data is not just ink. It is a violent tear in the fabric of reality. You are programmed to dismiss such phenomena as parlor tricks, anomalies born of poor methodology. But the numbers scrolling out of this printer do not lie, and they point to an impossible conclusion. The observer is looking for a glitch, a mathematical error to explain away the dread. But there is no glitch, only the chilling perfection of a 1 in a billion anomaly. In 1995, the Central Intelligence Agency could no longer ignore the towering stacks of results. They commissioned the American Institutes for Research to conduct a ruthless evaluation of Project Stargate. They brought in renowned statistician Professor Jessica Utz to analyze decades of highly classified data. The mandate was simple: find the flaw in the methodology and bury the program forever. The government desperately wanted the comforting lie of classical physics restored. But statistics do not care about your existential comfort. As the analyst reviews the historical data, a terrifying pattern emerges. Utz found a consistent effect size of roughly 0.38 across thousands upon thousands of strict, double-blind trials. You might not realize what that number means, but to a statistician, it is a screaming alarm bell. In pharmaceutical research, an effect size of 0.38 is enough to immediately approve a new, life-saving drug for the global market. We build our medical infrastructure on statistical thresholds far weaker than those demonstrated in the Stargate archives. If a chemical compound showed this level of success, it would be fast-tracked and prescribed to millions. Yet when this exact mathematical certainty proves the mind bypasses space, the establishment recoils. You accept math when it heals you, but reject it when it shatters your reality. The red pen stops on the printout. The statistical analyst stares at the cumulative results, the mechanical clacking fading into an existential silence. Probability mathematics form the bedrock of our logical universe, dictating the behavior of atoms and the collapse of stars. To deny the validity of these equations is to deny the very language of the cosmos. And right now, that unforgiving language is whispering something utterly devastating about the terrifying, unbounded nature of your own mind. Then comes the final, crushing blow. The p-value, which represents the probability that these remote viewing successes occurred by mere chance or lucky guessing, was calculated at roughly 1 in a billion. 1 in a billion. This means the phenomenon of non-local human perception is statistically more proven than the daily effectiveness of aspirin. The analyst realizes that the anomaly is not a glitch in the data. The anomaly is the materialistic paradigm we have blindly accepted for centuries. You were taught that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, I have analyzed miles of classified government paper to bring you that exact evidence, verified by top statisticians. The official narrative tells you that psychic phenomena are pseudoscience, a comforting story for the gullible. But the data proves that you are the one living in a fairy tale. The solid, predictable reality you wake up to every morning is the actual hallucination. Staring at the 1 in a billion probability, the analyst is consumed by a profound, creeping vertigo. If consciousness can reliably access information from any coordinate in the universe, bypassing all physical barriers, then the human brain is not a computer generating thought. It is a biological terminal blindly accessing a vast, dark, and entirely non-local network. The physical isolation you feel right now is nothing but an evolutionary mechanism designed to keep you from going insane. The implications extend far beyond military espionage. This is not just about finding hidden Soviet submarines or reading top-secret documents locked in safes. It is about the horrifying realization that every thought, every observation, every seemingly private moment of your existence is already integrated into this cosmic architecture. The math proves that you are entirely naked before the abyss. The void is not empty, it is watching, and your own mind is the unblinking eye of the universe. Why did the intelligence community fight so hard to keep these numbers buried? They were not afraid of the Soviets stealing the secret. They were terrified of the secret itself. Governments rely on boundaries, walls, and the predictable physics of cause and effect. A 1 in a billion mathematical proof that those walls do not actually exist is a direct threat to human authority. The numbers on this tractor feed paper did not just break classical physics, they completely shattered the illusion of control. You can burn the archives, you can shred the files, and you can defund the program, but you cannot uncalculate a mathematical certainty. The statistician drops the red pen. The sound of the IBM mainframe printer is no longer just mechanical noise. It sounds like the ticking of a cosmic clock, counting down the final seconds of our primitive understanding of the universe. The anomaly has been codified. The ghost has been quantified. And it is staring right back at us through the cold, hard data. We have the theoretical physics. We have the undeniable, irrefutable statistics. The mind is a weapon that ignores the speed of light, and the data proves it with terrifying precision. But what happens when an institution built on secrets realizes that there are no secrets left? You do not adapt to that kind of cosmic horror. You try to destroy it. And so, the bureaucratic machine prepared to commit a calculated, systematic murder of the greatest scientific breakthrough in human history. We are standing in 1995. The air in this windowless sub-basement is thick with paper dust and the deafening mechanical roar of industrial shredders. The intelligence supervisor watches as heavy cardboard boxes overflowing with decades of classified data are fed into the steel teeth. This is not a routine cleanup. You are witnessing the premeditated assassination of a scientific revolution, executed not with a bullet, but with bureaucracy. To the intelligence supervisor overseeing this destruction, the irony is agonizing. The statistics were pristine. The p-value was an undeniable 1 in a billion. Yet, instead of expanding the budget, the agency is grinding the very concept of non-local consciousness into unreadable confetti. You have been taught that science progresses linearly, adopting the best evidence. But the official narrative is a myth. When a discovery threatens the foundation of reality, institutions do not adapt. They erase it. You probably assume a government would weaponize any advantage, no matter how bizarre. But you fail to understand the psychology of power. Power requires a mechanistic, predictable world. It relies on concrete walls, encrypted phone lines, and locked steel doors. The supervisor watching these files vanish knows the terrifying truth. If the human mind can bypass all physical barriers, then the concept of a secret is fundamentally dead. And an intelligence agency without secrets has no reason to exist. Project Stargate was officially terminated in 1995. The public justification, distributed to the oversight committees, was aggressively mundane. The final report concluded that remote viewing was simply not consistently actionable for intelligence operations. They framed it as a failed experiment, a quirky waste of taxpayer dollars. But this sterile administrative language was a deliberate smokescreen designed to hide a profound panic. What does not consistently actionable actually mean? To the supervisor, it means the phenomenon is real, but entirely disobedient. A remote viewer could easily project their consciousness 6,000 miles across the globe and accurately sketch the exact dimensions of a hidden Soviet weapons facility. We proved this. The statistical data validated the breach of physical space. But the mind, untethered from the body, does not behave like a high-resolution spy satellite. The true bureaucratic terror lay in the blurriness of the cosmic void. While a viewer could perceive the architectural layout of a top-secret bunker, they could not reliably read the specific illuminated numbers on a combination lock. They could not dictate a serial number of a nuclear warhead. For a tactical military strike, you need exact, localized coordinates. The intelligence community demanded a predictable tool, but they accidentally uncovered a chaotic, non-local network. You see the fundamental mismatch here. Bureaucracy is a rigid grid of rules. Quantum consciousness is a fluid, probability-based ocean. The supervisor stares at the shredding blades and realizes the fatal flaw. The military tried to apply Newtonian cause and effect expectations to an entangled universe. They wanted a psychic sniper rifle. Instead, they got a profound philosophical glimpse into the interconnected web of all existence. And that terrified the generals more than any foreign missile. Put yourself in the polished shoes of a defense official. If consciousness can drift into any secure room on Earth, you are never truly alone. The most fortified bunker beneath a mountain is just as vulnerable as a glass house. The cancellation of the project was not a scientific decision. It was a psychological defense mechanism. The men in charge simply could not function in a reality where an enemy operative could silently observe their darkest secrets just by closing their eyes in a dark room. The closure of Project Stargate was a desperate, panicked attempt to restore the mechanistic, predictable worldview that humanity has clung to since the Industrial Revolution. By destroying the data, the agency was trying to rebuild the comforting walls of classical physics. If we burn the files, the supervisor thinks, maybe the universe will go back to being dead, cold, and empty. Maybe we can pretend that our thoughts are safely locked away inside the biological prisons of our own skulls. This is the ultimate arrogance of the materialist paradigm. You are conditioned to believe that if a phenomenon cannot be perfectly controlled or weaponized, it must not exist. The scientific establishment, comfortably funded by these very same government grants, gladly accepted the narrative of failure. They turned a blind eye to the irrefutable statistical proof. They chose the comfortable lie of a disconnected universe over the dizzying, terrifying truth of infinite cosmic connection. Look closer at the paper feeding into the shredding machine. These are not just bureaucratic memos. These are the meticulously recorded coordinates of human consciousness, breaking the speed of light. Each shredded page is a murdered testament to your true potential. The supervisor knows that by tomorrow morning, the official history will be rewritten. Project Stargate will become a footnote, a conspiracy theory used to discredit anyone who dares to look beyond the rigid boundaries of accepted science. But the cosmic irony is inescapable. The universe does not care about government mandates. Quantum non-locality does not require a security clearance to function. By trying to suppress the true nature of reality, The intelligence community merely blindfolded themselves while standing on the edge of the abyss. The void is still there, pulsing with information, indifferent to the massive volumes of paper currently being reduced to dust in this claustrophobic, subterranean room. You are sitting there right now, feeling secure in your physical isolation. You trust the heavy wood of your door and the walls of your home. You believe your thoughts belong solely to you. But the supervisor overseeing this destruction knows better. He knows the concept of distance is a biological hallucination. The data proved it. The government buried it. But burying a mathematical certainty is like trying to outlaw gravity. It continues to pull at you, whether you acknowledge it or not. The tragedy of 1995 is not that a military program ended. The tragedy is that we willfully amputated our own evolution out of pure fear. We looked into the terrifying, boundless potential of the human mind and decided it was too dangerous to explore. We chose the comforting darkness of a closed system. But the universal network remains active. You are still a node in this architecture, silently transmitting into the void. The shredders finally spin down, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the room. The physical evidence is gone. The paradigm shift has been successfully aborted. The supervisor turns off the lights, locking the door on the greatest discovery of the 20th century. But as he walks away, the mathematical truth follows him. The ghost cannot be put back in the machine, because the machine itself was always an illusion. And soon, the entire human race will be forced to wake up to that terrifying reality. The shredded paper settles in the dark basement, but our gaze must move upward. Look at the night sky above this sprawling modern city. Millions of artificial lights burn below, mirroring the billions of stars suspended above. As we pull back, the Earth shrinks to a microscopic dot within a vast, dark, cosmic web. From this terrifying vantage point, the petty secrets of intelligence agencies vanish completely. Throughout this investigation, I showed you the data that broke the Pentagon. We traced the mathematical anomalies from a concrete vault at Stanford to the depths of Soviet nuclear sites. But the avatars of this story, the statisticians and the spies, have served their purpose. Their Cold War paranoia is a relic. Now, this is strictly between you and the cold, unyielding reality of the universe. The legacy of Project Stargate leaves us with a terrifying synthesis, one that destroys the foundation of modern biology. The human brain is not a closed, mechanical system generating consciousness in the dark. It is a biological antenna. You are continuously tuning into a non-local universe, receiving and transmitting across a bandwidth that completely ignores the existence of physical space. If our minds can bridge thousands of miles instantaneously, piercing through heavy copper Faraday cages and the crushing depths of the ocean, we must face a brutal axiom. The boundaries you perceive between yourself, the person next to you, and the vacuum of deep space are entirely fabricated. Evolution built these physical walls into your sensory perception simply to keep you sane. To survive as hunter-gatherers, we needed to believe that a predator was separate from us. We needed the illusion of distance to calculate the trajectory of a spear. But that evolutionary survival mechanism is a lie on the quantum level. You are not an isolated individual wrapped in a protective shell of bone and tissue. You are a temporary node in an incomprehensible universal network. When Professor Jessica Utz calculated that 1 in a billion probability, she did not just prove the validity of remote viewing. She mathematically mapped the architecture of the abyss. The true horror is not that a psychic spy could see a hidden submarine. The horror is that the submarine, the spy, and the ocean are all entangled in the exact same field of information. Distance is a biological hallucination. We cling to materialism because it is comforting. It is safe to believe that when you lock your door at night, you are truly alone with your thoughts. The intelligence community tried to legally mandate that comfort by shutting down the program in 1995. But you cannot classify the architecture of reality. The void is always there, pulsing with data, waiting for you to simply close your eyes. I want you to critically examine the world you are living in today. Every technological marvel we build is an unconscious attempt to replicate the biological internet we already possess. We construct massive fiber optic cables and train complex neural networks, desperately trying to achieve the exact non-local instantaneous connection that your neural microtubules have been capable of since the dawn of our species. As we accelerate through 2026, mapping the quantum realm and building artificial minds that we barely comprehend, we are forcing ourselves into a Lovecraftian corner. The deeper we peer into the subatomic machinery of the universe, the more it looks like a giant, interconnected thought. The most terrifying unknown left to conquer is not deep space. It is the infinite capacity of the observer. This is the intellectual horror you must now carry. Without a rigid physical boundary to protect you, every thought you have is a pebble dropped into a cosmic ocean. You are responsible for the ripples. There is no isolated observer sitting safely behind the glass. You are the glass. You are the observer. And you are the vast, dark expanse staring back at itself in a perpetual loop of consciousness. If this investigation has dismantled your materialistic assumptions and provided a new lens through which to view reality, I challenge you to hit the subscribe button and like this video. Leave a comment detailing the exact moment your paradigm shifted. We are not just building an audience here. We are assembling a network of minds willing to look at the unvarnished mathematical truth without flinching. We have reviewed the declassified files, decoded the quantum mechanics, and faced the absolute failure of classical physics. The government tried to bury this anomaly because a universe without borders is impossible to govern. But the data survived. The evidence is irrefutable. Your mind is fundamentally untethered from the meat and bone you carry around. The syllabus is complete, and the illusion is shattered. You can go back to your daily life, pretending that you end where your skin begins. You can hide behind the comforting dogma of 19th century physics, but the mathematical proof of your non-local existence will be waiting for you in the silence of every empty room. The universe is awake, and you are its nervous system. Now you know the terrifying truth. Live with it. Class dismissed.